Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And we've just finished watching Southland Tales, which is on Mubi for the next week or so. I've wanted to see this since it came out, really. It came out in 2007, and it was kind of panned at the Cannes Film Festival, despite being up for the prizes. It was Richard Kelly's follow-up to his debut feature, Donnie Darko, in 2001. Which was also not that well received at the time, but 2-3 years later, people started to fall in love with it and realize, and it became basically a cult classic.
Yes, I remember it being so popular with a certain type of student that I felt compelled to see it. Yeah, I kind of, it was one of those films that like students were buzzing about. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember we all watched it when we were 17 or 18, I suppose, maybe 16, at my mate's house on a tiny little telly. We're all packed into the room, and we've got WKDs, and it was, sort of an after-school party thing. And maybe because it was such a small room and people were talking and stuff, I was kind of nonplussed by it at the time. And I've never really reevaluated it since, although I know I'm being unfair to it. So it didn't hit me in the way that it hit lots and lots of people. But I do kind of get it, And this always sounded interesting. And Richard Kelly was very young. He made this when he was 29 years old, Southland Tales.
Right. Has he made anything else since?
Yeah, a couple of years later, he made a film called The Box with Cameron Diaz and Frank Langella, which again I'm interested to see. And it was about a button. It was a kind of a Twilight Zone-y thing, I think, about Frank Langella shows up and he has this box with a button in, and if you press the button, then you'll get $1 million or something, but someone somewhere in the world will die. I think that's the idea. Yeah. And it sounded kind of interesting. Never seen it. And it was received better than this was. So this is just sprawling. Yes. It's set in a alternate USA of 2005 initially, where Texas is attacked with 2 nuclear bombs, and America just kind of explodes and shuts down and gets into a world war and so on and so forth. Although it's never explained who perpetrated this attack. And I think it really doesn't matter. It's about the American response, And then the majority of the film is set 3 years later in the run-up to the 2008 election amongst a kind of diverse and disparate cast of characters. There's porn stars, there's a big shot Hollywood star who's written a script, there's the government people and people in the political circles who are trying to rig and engineer the election. There's a kind of German mad scientist who's invented perpetual motion machine, or perpetual energy. There's all sorts going on.
Seann. Yeah.
Well, there's Seann, yeah, in weird makeup, and I really liked him.
I liked him.
And I must say, it's completely understandable to me why the film was so badly received and why it was such a flop. It cost $17 million and made less than $400,000. But
it's a mess of a film.
It's such a mess. But in some ways, I rather liked it.
I can't say I liked it. I mean, it took me 4 tries to see it all the way through, right? And partly that's because Mubi kept breaking up. I was trying to see it in my bedroom, and it's a bit distant from the server, so, it wasn't very strong. So that was the first reason. The second time I fell asleep at it. The third time I fell asleep at it again. And it was only today when I made a project of seeing it in the middle of the afternoon and, really focusing on it, that I was able to see it all the way through. So I think it's a film that's very, very ambitious, that there are a lot of things that I love. Actually, I would even go so far as to say that I've never seen Dwayne Johnson better. Yeah, and also Justin Timberlake. I've never seen him better in a film, He's really, really good, really attractive. He's very compelling. You can't take your eyes off him. It's the only film that I've seen him in where he actually comes across as a film star, right? And actually, it might be because his face is disfigured by makeup, so he has a different look. Than the look that he has normally in other films of his real face. There's something slightly wonky about his real face, actually, I think.
What did you make of him in The Social Network a couple of years after this? He's
very good, but I thought 90% of his performance was the director. Yeah, he is filmed as Satan, right? So yeah, he's always kind of in a certain kind of light, right? So it has a brilliant effect, but I'm not sure how much that's due to him. Yeah, whereas in this one, he is just very compelling and sexy and loose and charming. Yeah, kind of all the things that you expect of a film star. And it's full of interesting ideas. I did think that this is a man or a director who doesn't know where to put a camera.
I agree with that.
That, there are such interesting visual ideas, and yet they're never conveyed interestingly visually.
There's one which I think there's one image that really stood out to me, and I think it's maybe the only one in the film that is actually a valuable image, which is Seann William Scott and the mirror and the delay of his reflection.
Oh yes.
There's something about that which is a world that's in question and a psychology that's in question, and nothing is quite what it seems right now. But still, the reaction to it isn't overboard. It's just kind of he has this very deadpan reaction. There's a delay in my reflection, he says. So that I thought was wonderful.
Let's maybe agree and disagree, because I also think that is partly what I'm talking about. That it's conceptually wonderful, right? It's a wonderful idea, right? But actually, you could imagine a better director having filmed it better and more interestingly, because what remains interesting is the concept. Yeah, someone's looking at themselves in the mirror and there's a kind of a delayed reaction and, kind of the way that it's dramatized. But visually, it's like somebody just plonked the camera there in mid-distance, in a kind of a wide-ish lens, and that's it.
I know what you mean, but I think part of what appealed to me about that image was the sort of lack of response. Like I say, like Seann William Scott's character doesn't overly react to this. He just kind of accepts it, and I think the camera being just kind of sat there and taking it in as it does is doing the same thing. And I think because it's also an image that I think it took me a second to realise that's what was happening with his reflection. Like only after he moved a few times and then started doing it to himself, like deliberately waving his hand to check. That's when I realised, there is a delay in this. Like it's a weird effect, So that kind of.
I'm not sure. I would chalk that up to a happy accident. Actually, I mean,
maybe.
There's never a sense in this film that you feel that kind of there's any poetry in the visuals. Right, kind of, they're very pragmatic. So it's a very disjunctive film, because on the one hand, it's so smart and it's got such wonderful ideas, and it's conceptually brilliant. I think, right? There are things about it that I would love if only they had been filmed more stylishly. I mean, so even for example, that bit with Justin Timberlake, where it develops into a 1930s type of musical number with the legs and so on, right? Like, I mean, somebody else would have just put the camera a little bit lower, a little bit higher, a little bit closer, or created different dynamic patterns, and it would have been dazzling.
Yeah, I mean, it really struck me there that the camera is constantly on this essentially mid-shot of Justin Timberlake, and even when it pans away to something else, it's still just doing the same thing. And so the dancers behind him and the dancers on the sort of arcade machines putting their legs up, they're not shown off to their best advantage. They're just kind of stood behind him, and you can't really see them properly.
It's not contributing to conveying anything. The visuals are very bog standard, whereas actually I think the concepts and the situations and the imagination that's gone into the writing of this is extraordinary, right? So there's just that odd disjuncture.
Yeah, and when you think about the writing, it's a film that to me feels kind of simultaneously over and underwritten, in that it feels overwritten in that it's so trying to stuff so much in. There's so many conversations going on in the film and so many ideas, and it never has time to settle on anything. And at the same time, all of those ideas are underdeveloped in some respects, and I could imagine it working really, really well as like a cable drama, 1 hour a week for 20 episodes kind of thing. It reminded me in some respects of a TV show called Flash Forward, which was about this kind of rush to the end of the world sort of thing. Had that feel, but at the same time, you would lose something. You would lose what's cinematic about it. And although the camera may not be used as well as it could, it feels ambitious and I think there are times when it moves really smoothly, and when I finished watching it, I thought, I've seen something big here. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do know what you mean, actually. It's weird because it feels like an important film, but it also feels, at least to me, like a bad film.
Yes.
One of the things I've been watching a lot of, I've been watching a Burt Lancaster film a day, and I'm now in this period of the early 60s where he's making a lot of social issue films, right? So, The Young Savage is about juvenile delinquency, Judgment at Nuremberg is about the Nuremberg Nazi trials, and, kind of 7 Days in May is about, kind of an attempted coup d'etat in the US, right? And kind of, I was looking particularly yesterday at Judgment at Nuremberg, and I thought, oh my God, this film is so preachy, right? Like, it feels it has all the answers. And actually, I think this film is also quite full of ideas of what society is like. It actually doesn't feel preachy, even though it has a distinct point of view. So I'm not making the same kind of criticism as I'm making at Judgment at Nuremberg. But actually, these other Burt Lancaster films that do feel so preachy and so on, they at least engage you emotionally. So part of the way that they think they are doing this job is to get you to identify and to understand and to feel for the people that you're watching. And actually, this is a film that's full of intelligence, it's full of brilliant ideas, and I wasn't engaged with any of them. Yeah. I didn't feel for anything. I didn't care what happened, and there seemed to be no suspense. I actually think I never fully understand what was going on and how all the pieces fit together, right? So, and I think that's a problem in a film where you come out having felt, well, it's not true. I laughed. Yeah, I found some things quite funny. And actually, I was very charmed just by The Rock.
Dwayne Johnson.
Whatever. Yeah. And actually, I also found most of the actors had a lovely turn. They were very amusing.
I think it's extremely well cast. I think it's really, really well cast, and all the actors are used well. And I think it's interesting that there's at least 3 actors who have they were alumni of Saturday Night Live. There's Amy Poehler, John Lovitz, and Nora, what's her name? Nora Dunn, who was on in, I think, the late 80s. And I think that speaks to the kind of pop culture satire it has going on, because Saturday Night Live is full of that, and
sure.
And that's kind of, and this is like a 2.5 hour sort of attempt at that in some respects.
Well, I have a feeling that if the actors knew what they were doing, they came across very well. If they didn't, like Mandy Moore, they come across as awful.
Which one was Mandy Moore?
Yeah. Mandy Moore was the wife.
Yes, the wife.
Who is completely leaden and off throughout. So the film does have this countercultural sensibility. I also thought the music was interesting, in that respect. Yeah, kind of the score is by Moby, who's in, in very bad odor at the moment, but, who at that time was kind of like the latest cutting edge person. And I love the soundtrack to this very much.
I think his score is interesting because it counterpoints, I think, the funny side of the film. And I think the film is full of jokes and full of good jokes, and it made me laugh a lot. And the film is imagining a very absurd America, a very absurd pop culture and a very absurd politics. And, you can say all these things about how it's not that far off and how we've got close to that these days. And so on and so forth.
It feels very contemporary.
There are things that resonate, but I think there are things that resonated back then. I mean, I think that's why Richard Kelly was able to generate these ideas, and they're not totally unique. And there was a film called Idiocracy from around this time, maybe a few years earlier, that had some similar ideas about the kind of way America was going culturally. But I think it's very funny, right? But the absurdity that is funny, like absurdity isn't in itself always hilarious. It can be saddening or scary or disillusioning and all those kind of things. And I think that's what the music kind of adds in tone. This sense that while the jokes are jokes and they're funny, there's a weird disillusioned tone that overhangs it all. So it sets up this weird counterpoint that I really, really enjoyed, and I think the tone it sets is really strong.
Yes, I don't know. I mean, for me, it's one of those things. It's one of these films that works in moments, right? There are things that I think are absolutely brilliant. The car advert, where the cars, the animated section where the cars, fuck. It's brilliant, kind of. I mean, I think that was worth seeing the film alone for just to see that, really. But nothing hangs together.
No, it doesn't at
for
all.
me.
No.
And actually, I suppose it's one of those things that kind of, make you think about what is cinema, really. So the film is made right on that cusp of the move to digital, isn't it? Yeah? It's
it's in that sort of era, and then in the next film, in The Box, Richard Kelly's next film, he had Frank Langella's face kind of horribly disfigured, and they did that digitally rather than with makeup.
Right. So it's a film that kind of, makes you ask those questions, because I do think that visually it's so uninteresting, it's so poor, right? And yet, kind of, it's full of brilliant ideas. It's full of brilliant moments from actors. There are moments that you respond to, right? But to me, it's a film that has kind of no poetry, and also that has no emotional resonance. Yeah,
I totally agree with that. There's not a single character that you emotionally connect to at all, and that is a problem. I think there are moments when you might. I think there are moments with Seann William Scott, the kind of two incarnations of his character who have sadness inside them. The one who's kind of let down his mate in Fallujah, he's back from the Iraq War, and he hangs on to this sadness inside him. But at the end, when his kind of twin forgives him and helps him kind of let go of that, like, that should feel cathartic and expressive, and it doesn't. It feels quite flat.
And it doesn't, and it's not Seann William Scott's fault. Because actually, one of the things that I was thinking of, because, the director is very good with actors, I think. You have to give him credit, because so many of them come across as, at least as attractive as I've ever seen them. And actually, this is one of those that also made me think that, Seann William Scott could have been a movie star, right? Because now the film is almost, 15 years old, or... Yeah, and you wonder, what has Seann William Scott been up to, right? Like, he had such a
he was huge in the early 2000s.
Yeah, in the American Pie films and all that stuff. And then he kind of disappeared. And actually, he's so attractive in this film. Yeah, he's both good and attractive. That it makes you wonder, like, yeah, why didn't other directors use him better, really?
The last 10 years for Seann William Scott, I'm just looking at his credits here, since 2010, when he did Cop Out and showed up in Jackass 3D, he's mainly done Final Destination, Ice Age, and another American Pie film. So, like, he's really done almost nothing in the last 10 years, and maybe he's just got other interests or something, I don't know. At least that's in cinema. Maybe he's done more in telly. Yeah. No, he's not really done any more in telly. Don't know.
Well, how?
Because I miss him. I think he was great. He was always very good.
Yes. So anyway, this is what's odd about the film. I think the film conceptually really does speak to our moment. Actually, again, maybe I'm reading everything in terms of coronavirus, but a lot of the things that the film deals with is being discussed now. So passports between states, yeah. Things like that, right? So you're looking at an America that has been entirely corrupted by corporate culture. That's a mixture of infotainment and porn and politics. Yeah, that is post-nuke and on the verge of the between post-nuke and apocalyptic, where law and order has fallen down. You're dealing with a failed state, really. I mean, all of those things resonate with
the surveillance state. Importantly, there's the thing set up about the US ident, I think it's called, which is basic, and this is pre all the Edward Snowden revelations that would come out sort of 6 years later. about how the NSA actually is looking at everyone, and this is a very obvious extension to the Patriot Act as it's put in the film. That means there's fingerprint ID to get into computers and things, and the government is just looking at you all the time. I suppose the only difference is, like, in this sci-fi version, everyone knows it, whereas it would be a few years before people would start to know it here, and people react differently as well. Like, do they act differently? I think actually in the film, people just kind of go about their business, don't they? Still, you see the revolutionary group that's trying to fight the system, but most people just carry on, which they do now.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
I also think it had a really, really strong sense of place, the film, and I think it speaks to the fact that probably all the money was spent on locations and production design, because I think all of that is really strong. You feel that this is South California and kind of LA and Venice Beach, and it's not just that it looks like it because that's where they are, but you feel the sun bearing down on people. You feel the kind of compression of people in these spaces. You feel the kind of the idea that this should be a beautiful free place with the beach just next to you, and at the same time you can't really do anything. You feel oppressed. I think it has a really strong sense of all of that.
I think it's maybe too cynical. So, for example, when you have the resistance groups that are all these Marxist, resistance, which I thought was interesting, to make the resistance Marxist rather than libertarian, But then, to have it really just be a kind of a corporate hack, that basically all of this is really being financed, by the Wallace Shawn character, who actually is using all of this resistance stuff to gather information. Yeah, so the film is kind of cynical all the way through. There's a film that offers no way out, right?
Well, I think the thing that's interesting is the only way out is death. And I think his kind of right-hand man character, or I should say right-hand woman, who's called Serpentine, I think, the Asian lady.
Bai Ling or whatever. She was wonderful. Yeah.
She has a kind of noirish sort of femme fatale thing going on. Also slightly racist, exotic kind of character, sort of visual design, I think, going on. But she has this thing where you read in, or at least I did, I read into her character that she knows more than she's letting on, sort of thing. And she knows when the film starts to kind of gather pace towards the end of the world, because we are in the end of days here, and people start talking very openly about these are the last 3 days left on Earth, and what would happen if you're the version of you that had gone through this rift touched you, the world would explode, which I thought was kind of fun as well. Like the idea that you have all these films that have time travel where you go, don't go back in time and then meet your past version of yourself because the world could explode. Well, this is a film that does it, He meets a past version of himself and they touch and the world ends. But with her character, it's like Wallace Shawn, who is kind of behind all of this, isn't doing it to destroy the world. He's doing it to control the world. And she clearly knows that's what he's up to. And she lets it happen. Because she could intervene and try and stop things if she wanted to. And I think what her character is kind of saying, the only way out of this, the only way to prevent him from succeeding, is to let the world die, to let the apocalypse happen. And similarly, there's a thing, at least 3 times it happens, where people point guns at their heads and say, do this thing or I will shoot myself. Like, that's the last resort to get people to do what you want. Move to the back of the ship or I'll shoot myself. Let go of my hand or I'll shoot myself. And I think the film... It's interesting you saying that it speaks to today and there are things that resonate with today. I think actually the film really resonates with the time that it comes from. Because...
it's not an either-or situation. I'm not saying that it doesn't resonate. It clearly also resonates with, September 11 and all of those things. But it also resonates now, I think.
I didn't mean to say that it's one or the other, but I think it's easy to overlook that because it's the film, I think, is such a product of its time because... You talk about the neo-Marxist revolutionary group being interesting. Well, you have to remember that this is a world before America started to kind of change with Obama. Like, Obama people hadn't really heard of even at this time. So this was the post 9/11 Republican, heavily Christian, heavily warmongering state where everyone was a neocon, and they were coming up with all these justifications for war. So the idea of the kind of the revolution being left, actually at the time, I think it actually would have seemed kind of surprising. Like those ideas weren't really in the water supply at that time at all. They really are now, with these things, the ideas of bringing down the banks and universal basic income and making things fairer and so on and so forth since the financial crash. But they weren't in the water supply at the time, so I think it seems very sci-fi for the time it comes from.
Can we talk a little bit about the voiceover?
Yeah.
Because you mentioned the religious element. And of course, I think the voiceover is a complete and utter mess. But it's also very interesting. It's a mess because, you have introductory voiceover for the first 20 minutes of the film. It just goes on and on and on, right? And I thought it's very messy. On the other hand, this whole thing of Revelation 1, Revelation 2, there are these things that I couldn't be sure whether they were actual citations from the Bible or they were like mock citations from the Bible that, spoke to the narrative. But in either of those cases, it's interesting because actually the whole narrative is threaded through with a religious, I wouldn't say perspective, but at least a gloss, a kind of religion is structurally necessary in this film,
Yeah. Well, Dwayne Johnson's character has these tattoos on him of different that relate to different religions, different religious figures, and I think when he stands on stage at the end in the blimp, and he stands with his arms to the side in that very classic crucifixion pose. His back is bleeding, and his back is where the Jesus one is. And it's as if to say, like, the end of days is real because Jesus is bleeding, And at the end, the Seann William Scott characters, I'm sure they have dialogue that relates to... Oh, no, it's the voiceover talks about him as the true Messiah, doesn't it? The new true Messiah, my friend Seann William Scott, who I was at war with, who I was in the war with. It's threaded through from the start with Revelations, and it hangs over it again, like the score does with this end of days is coming. You don't feel like anything positive can possibly happen in these people's lives from the start.
Yes. Actually, it's very interesting because, one of the things is you get a lot of talk about sex, but the only moment of sexiness or of real desire is the bit with the Justin Timberlake where he does the musical number, and then a woman gets between his legs and he does this cute little tongue hanging out thing. And you go, oh yeah, he's really into it, right? The rest, you have porn stars, you have sexual blackmail, but you never feel anybody's turned on by anybody else. Yeah.
No, that's true. Even though the porn stars are always talking about teen horniness. They say teen horniness is on the rise. You don't see any.
Yes. No, you don't see any of it, really. And likewise with love, you have father-daughter things. It seemed completely cold. You have husband-wife things with no feelings, evident between them. It's really a world without feeling,
Yeah. To just briefly go back to the thing about the time it came from, one film that really struck me as being relevant or comparable is M. Night Shyamalan's The Village.
Never seen it.
Oh, well, it's probably not worth talking about too much then. It's from 2004, but that's another film that was heavily panned at the time, although it was never, ever going to go to Cannes. But it was... And I think it was panned for slightly different reasons than this, although I think they share a kind of kinship in that these were young directors who had made films that really struck a chord in Donnie Darko and Sixth Sense, and these were both seen as disappointing in all sorts of ways. But it's a film that comes out of the Iraq War again. It comes out of the American sort of American fears and reactions to the Iraq War, and it's done through a sort of horror thing. I don't want to say too much more about it because actually I think you should really see it. It's an interesting film and much better than it was ever received as. I think it's had probably a critical acceptance in recent years. It just struck me as something very similar. That the two films speak to a state of mind that is like post 9/11, pre-Obama America, in a nutshell. Yeah, that's what these films feel like. All right.
Anything more you want to say?
Well, I've talked a lot about the things that I liked, and because there were lots of things that I liked, and I suppose I'd rather concentrate on those. But it is important to say that it's a hard film to recommend because it is, as you say, a mess in all sorts of ways, and the ideas and the things you can talk about and think about are so much more interesting than the way that the film is executed.
I would recommend it nonetheless. I mean, in fact, I would highly recommend it, I mean, I think it's one of those films that is a mess, right? There's no question about it. But I think just because it's a mess doesn't mean that it's not worth seeing. I mean, I think, it's a mess of somebody who seems very, very brilliant. It's full of interesting ideas. It's full of exciting moments from actors whom you would not expect that from. I think it's got The Rock, to me, at his most attractive. Because I've always thought he was very charismatic, but actually, I'm someone who was kind of repulsed by that body. It was like, it's almost like too poppy. Here he looks like a real person who's fit rather than, somebody who's had all kinds of chemicals injected into him. Yeah. So, that could, and maybe it's just that he's younger, but he's extremely charismatic and attractive. So there's lots of reasons to see the film, and I think primarily, it's a film that's effervescent with ideas that are not fully realized cinematically, but nonetheless keep popping up and delighting or making you think. So that's enough to recommend it to anyone.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to get people to get the wrong impression and say, you'll love every minute and it makes sense all the way through, because it definitely don't. So it's one of those advisedly, I recommend this. It's interesting, but you won't actually enjoy it. Maybe. Well, to be fair, we saw it on Mubi, and Mubi have put it up under the name Perfect Failures. They're putting up a string of perfect failures, and this speaks to that,
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the right rubric under which to see it. So I think, if you are interested in ideas, this is one that's full of them, so, and it'll certainly lead to very interesting conversations, even though the film is very uneven, to say the least.
Yeah, that's fair.
All right. Well, thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.